confronting the man who controls every major shipping lane running through the port of Miami. With a USB drive full of evidence pressed between her sweating fingers, teaches a woman things about fear that she thought she already understood. Abby Morse had told herself that riding the elevator up to the 42nd floor was the bravest thing she would ever do. She found out exactly how wrong she was about 4 minutes later, when every exit in the Vance Group tower sealed itself shut with a sound like the world deciding she wasn't leaving. She hadn't even finished her sentence yet. The 42nd floor was a different country from the rest of Miami. Below those windows, the city churned. Corner stores and cracked sidewalks, the smell of exhaust and fried plantains drifting up off Calle Ocho. But up here, everything was dark walnut and brushed steel, and the low amber glow of desk lamps that probably cost more than 3 months of her old salary combined. Abby used to clean hotel rooms for a living. Now she stood in the middle of her husband's office in a dress that didn't quite zip all the way up the back and held a flash drive like it was a grenade she'd already pulled the pin on. Her name was Abigail Morse. Most people called her Abby. She was 27 years old, 5'4", and weighed 265 pounds, which she knew because her doctor had told her at her last checkup, and because she could feel every single one of those pounds right now, pressing down through the soles of her shoes into the polished concrete floor. In Dorian Vance's world, the world of people who owned towers and port terminals and men with guns, a woman who looked like her was supposed to be invisible. She had been invisible her whole life. At the Meridian Grand Hotel, where she'd changed linens and scrubbed tile grout for 6 years, nobody looked twice at the heavyset girl with the bad posture and the housekeeping cart. She was furniture, background noise. Dorian Vance had looked at her. That was the beginning and possibly the end of everything. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of learning what it meant to live inside a gilded trap. The private car, the couture appointments where the saleswomen smiled too wide and said nothing about the fact that nothing on the rack came close to fitting her. The charity dinners where the other women orbiting Dorian's circle measured her with their eyes and found her lacking. She'd heard the whispers. She knew exactly what they said. That Dorian Vance, who could have had anyone, had for some unfathomable reason chosen the fat hotel maid. They called it a phase. They called it a power play, some obscure flex only a man like Dorian could appreciate. Abby had spent 2 years telling herself it didn't matter what they said, because what she had with Dorian was real. Then she'd found the drive. Francesca had given it to her 3 days ago. Francesca worked the front desk at the Meridian now, and she and Abby had stayed close even after Abby's life had lurched sideways into the upper stratosphere. They got coffee on Thursdays. They talked about real things, not the charity circuit, not port logistics, real things. So when Francesca had pressed the small black drive into her palm in the parking garage and said she'd found it in a lost-and-found bag stamped with the Vance Group logo, Abby had taken it home and plugged it in. The files had a label, acquisition target, Morse Abigail R. surveillance logs, her father's union records from before he died, a psychological profile compiled from interviews with her neighbors, her co-workers, her high school guidance counselor. Attached, a strategic memo noting that securing a personal relationship with the Morse daughter would provide leverage over 3 remaining loyal union stewards who had refused to bend to Vance Group's port reorganization. She hadn't slept since. Now she stood in his office and dropped the flash drive onto his desk the way you drop a match into dry grass. It bounced once and skidded toward his hand. Dorian Vance looked up from his laptop. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been handsome for so long it had calcified into something harder, jaw like quarried stone, eyes the color of deep water. He wore no jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, showing forearms roped with muscle, and on the left, the edge of a tattoo that ran up toward his shoulder, an old one from before the suits. He looked at the drive. He looked at her. Abby, his voice was the same as always, low and unhurried, like a tide that had decided to come in. Don't. Her voice was shaking and she hated it. Don't say my name like that right now. Look at what's on that drive, Dorian. Look at it and tell me I'm wrong about what it means. He didn't reach for the drive. He leaned back in his chair, and his expression did something she hadn't expected. It went very still. Not the stillness of innocence, the stillness of a man who had been waiting for something and was watching it finally arrive. Where did you get this? It doesn't matter where I got it. She pressed her hands flat against the front of her dress to stop them from shaking. What matters is what's on it. You had a file on me before we ever met. You had my father's union records. You had a psychological workup, Dorian, like I was a mark, like this entire marriage was a transaction. The silence that followed had texture to it. It pressed against her eardrums. Dorian stood up slowly. He buttoned his left cuff, then his right. Precise, unhurried movements, like a man steeling himself for something he'd already rehearsed. He walked around the desk and crossed to the far wall where a slim panel was mounted at eye level. She had always assumed it was a thermostat. He pressed his thumb to it, and the panel slid aside to reveal a keypad beneath. Dorian, what are you doing? He typed a sequence and hit enter. Somewhere deep in the building's bones, she heard a low hydraulic hum begin to travel through the floor. Sit down, Abby. I'm not sitting down. What did you just do? He turned to face her, and his expression was the most frightening thing she had ever seen on a human face, because it wasn't anger. It was something that looked almost like grief. I locked the building, he said. Not because of you. Sit down, please. I need you to hear me. She didn't sit. She crossed to the elevator bank and slapped the call button. Nothing. She hit it again. The indicator light above the doors was dark. She turned to the emergency stairwell beside it and grabbed the handle. It didn't move. She could hear the deadbolts engaging, a series of heavy mechanical thunks, cascading down through the floors below like dominoes falling. Open it, she turned back to him, and her voice cracked on the second word. Open the door right now, or I will scream until someone in this building calls the police. The walls are reinforced concrete, he said, and there was nothing cold in how he said it. It wasn't a threat, it was an apology taking a strange shape. Abby, Francesca isn't your friend. She went very still. The drive she gave you, Dorian continued, walking back to his desk. He pulled open the top drawer and removed a manila folder thick with flagged pages. He set it facing her. I've known about it for 72 hours. My team intercepted a communication 3 days ago. The drive was sourced from a print shop in Hialeah and loaded with a combination of real archived documents and fabricated context. It was put together specifically to make you run. The blood in Abby's hands felt like it had stopped moving. Francesca has been on the Guzman cartel's payroll for 14 months, Dorian said. She was placed in your life because you are the one consistent variable in my operation that my enemies cannot predict or control. They couldn't buy you. They couldn't threaten you. You don't have access to operational information. So they decided to remove you the only way they could. They needed you to walk out that door on your own. Abby moved to the desk. Her legs felt unsteady. She opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos she didn't recognize. Francesca at a restaurant, across from a man in a linen shirt, financial records, wire transfers timestamped over the past year. Her stomach turned. The documents on the drive, she said, not looking up. About my father, about me. Are any of them real? Dorian didn't answer immediately. That pause cost him something she could see. Some of them are real, he said. I did have your father investigated, but not to. Don't tell me what it wasn't. She looked up. Her eyes were burning. Tell me what it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Your father, before he died, got pulled into something he didn't understand. 3 stewards under him had been running a skimming operation off port contracts for years. When the audits started catching up, they needed a senior officer to absorb the liability. Your father was too honest to know he was being set up. I found out 18 months before we ever met. I had my attorneys bury the paper trail before the city could open a formal investigation. Because the investigation would have taken your father's name down with it, posthumously, and the pension with it, the one thing keeping you in that apartment. Abby stared at him. She was breathing very carefully, the way she did when she was trying not to cry. You protected my father's name, she said slowly, before you knew me. Yes. And then you met me. And then I met you. Something shifted in his face. The psychological profile, that was my security team being thorough after I told them I wanted to know who you were. Not who to use, who you were. The memo you saw was written by an analyst who didn't know the context. He assumed it was business. I never read it. I had the whole file destroyed 6 months into our marriage, or I thought I did. Someone kept a copy. The hydraulic hum in the floor changed pitch. Both of them heard it at the same time. Dorian's head came up. He crossed to his monitor and pulled up the security feed, and his jaw went tight in a way she recognized. Not anger. Calculation. What is that? Someone is in the parking structure. His voice had stripped itself of everything except precision. Abby, I need you away from the windows. Dorian. Now. He said it the way he said things when there was no argument available, and she moved, because whatever else was true tonight, she had learned in 3 years of marriage that when Dorian Vance used that particular tone, the thing he was worried about was worth worrying about. He picked up his phone. Fletcher. His voice was flat. Status on the parking structure. I have motion on B level. The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. She could hear it across the room. Already on it, Mr. Vance. Probably a sensor glitch. She heard the deliberate ease of it, the practiced quality of someone performing reliability. Get visual confirmation before you stand anyone down. Dorian hung up. He looked at Abby for a moment, just looked at her the way he did when he was memorizing details. When Francesca gave you the drive, did she know you were coming here tonight? Abby thought back to the parking garage, Francesca's hand around hers. Be brave. You deserve the truth. Yes, she said quietly. I told her. Dorian closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, they were different, colder, more focused. He pulled open the bottom desk drawer and removed a firearm, checked the chamber with the practiced ease of 10,000 repetitions, and set it within reach. The Guzman cartel has been trying to break my hold on the North Terminal for 2 years, he said, pulling up additional feeds. Fletcher has been my head of security for 6. 3 months ago, I started noticing things. Small things. Information reaching the wrong people. Schedules that shouldn't have been predictable. I've been building a case. He stopped, his eyes fixed on one of the monitors. His expression went absolutely flat. Abby crossed to look at the screen. The parking structure feed showed 2 of his men. They were on their knees, hands behind their heads. Behind them stood 4 figures in tactical gear she didn't recognize. Those aren't cartel soldiers, she said, because she'd seen enough of his world to know the difference. No, Dorian said, they're not. His phone rang. He put it on speaker. Fletcher's voice came through, and it was a different voice than it had been 60 seconds ago. The performance dropped like a coat falling off a hook. I figured you'd have the building locked already, Fletcher said. Smart, doesn't matter. I have 14 men in the structure, and 2 past your south checkpoint. The checkpoint you don't know about because I designed your security grid. You have maybe 3 minutes before they reach your floor. A pause. Here's the deal, Dorian. Send the woman down in the elevator and I call my people off. Or you don't, and we come up and take her anyway, and you don't survive the conversation." Dorian looked at Abby. His eyes were very steady. "My answer," he said into the phone, "is no." He cut the call and came around the desk. He took her hand, and his grip was iron, and he pulled her toward the bookcase on the far wall, floor-to-ceiling walnut, packed with things she'd walked past 100 times. He reached behind the third shelf from the top and pressed something, and the entire left section swung inward on hinges. "Move," he said. She moved. The room beyond was small and dense with monitors, a weapons rack, a heavy steel door on the far wall. The bookcase swung shut behind them and engaged with a sound like the world sealing over. Emergency lighting came on, harsh white, that made everything look clinical and completely real. Dorian went straight to the monitors. The feeds clicked through the building. She counted the men she could see, 8, 9, 12, moving with coordinated efficiency through marble lobbies and service corridors. "Fletcher," she said. The word felt strange in her mouth. He made a deal. Dorian's hands moved across the keyboard. Guzman needed someone on the inside, someone who could hand over the grid layout, the schedules, the structural vulnerabilities. Fletcher didn't do this for ideology. He did it for the South Terminal lease rights. He paused. He also knew I was watching him. I'd been keeping him close while I built the case. Tonight he decided to accelerate his timeline. "He used me," Abby said. "He knew about Francesca. He knew about the drive. He let it happen because he needed me running, or he needed you destabilized enough to slip." Dorian looked at her across the room. In the white emergency light, his face was stripped of every layer he usually wore. No composure, no careful distance. Just a man who was afraid of something specific, and the specific thing was her. "I handled this wrong," he said. "I knew about the drive, and I didn't come to you. I thought I could resolve it before you had to know any of it. I've been deciding what you should be protected from since the beginning, and I was wrong to do that." A concussion hit the building, not close, but enough to feel through the floor. Abby grabbed the edge of a console. The monitors flickered. "They're on 38, Dorian said, scanning the feeds. He pulled the MP5 down from the wall rack, loaded it. He moved to stand beside her, and his free hand found her arm, not gripping. "Just there. A different kind of language. Abby." "I know." She looked at him. "We're going to talk about all of it after." He nodded once, and something moved across his face that she didn't have a word for yet. The far door, the emergency tunnel access, beeped twice. Dorian raised the MP5 instantly, aiming at the center of it. The door opened. Fletcher stepped through. He looked exactly the same as he always had. Gray at the temples, a soldier's posture, the careful blank expression of a man who had made a career out of looking trustworthy. He held a pistol at his side, not raised, which was somehow worse than if it had been. "I came through the maintenance shaft," Fletcher said. He sounded almost regretful. "You changed my access code to the main bunker, I noticed, but you forgot about the secondary tunnel, old infrastructure. You built this before I came on." "Put the gun down." "I don't want to hurt either of you." He looked at Abby with something that might have been genuine. This was never personal. "Then what was it?" Abby said. He actually considered the question. Business. Dorian is a brilliant operator. He made one mistake. His eyes moved back to Dorian. "You want to know the exact moment I started making arrangements. 6 months ago, the Delgado contract meeting. You left early because she had a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup. You walked out of a Port Authority negotiation because your wife needed to see her GP. He said it like a diagnosis. That's when I knew you'd gone soft. A man who leaves that table for that reason is a man who can be moved." The gun came up, not toward Dorian. Dorian moved before Abby's brain fully processed what she was seeing. The MP5 fired once. In the enclosed concrete space, the sound was total, physical, a thing that hit her in the chest and the ears and the floor all at once. She pressed herself into the corner, palms over her mouth. When the noise stopped, Fletcher was on the floor. Dorian stood over him, chest rising and falling hard. Then he turned. He crossed the room to her in 3 steps, and his hands were on her face, her shoulders running down her arms. "Are you hit?" His voice was wrecked. "Look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." She grabbed his wrists. His hands were trembling. This man who moved through the world like weather, like something that had decided where it was going, and nothing could redirect it. His hands were trembling against her arms. "I'm fine. I'm right here." He pulled her against his chest and held her without saying anything, and she could feel his heartbeat, hard, ragged, proof of something she hadn't let herself be fully sure of until this exact moment. The radio on Fletcher's belt crackled. A voice said, "Boss, it's Gallo. Structure is clear." Fletcher's people stood down when they lost contact with him. "Francesco is in custody at the South checkpoint. What do you need?" Dorian reached down and picked up the radio. He didn't let go of Abby. "Get the cars to the loading bay. 10 minutes." The safe house was a condo in Coral Gables, high enough to see Biscayne Bay going silver in the earliest light. Someone had left coffee brewing. Abby sat at the kitchen island in a borrowed shirt and felt the adrenaline leaving her body like water draining out of a bathtub. Slow, then all at once. Dorian set a mug in front of her. He sat across the island, and for a moment they just looked at each other in ordinary kitchen light. And everything that had happened in the last 5 hours sat between them like a third presence in the room. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined jacket and placed a document on the counter. An annulment petition, his signature already on the bottom line. Abby looked at it for a long time without touching it. "I had it drawn up 2 days ago," Dorian said. "When I understood how long I'd been deciding what you had the right to know, I don't get to make that call for you. I never should have." The rawness in his voice was close to the surface, not hidden the way he usually hid things. "You can take that, and I will make sure you have everything you need. A clean life, wherever you want it. No one from tonight comes near you again. I promise you that." Abby put her hand flat on the paper. She could feel the texture of it. Good weight, the kind of document that meant something. She thought about the hotel room on the 7th floor she used to clean, the corner one that always smelled like someone's old perfume, no matter how many times she aired it out. She thought about her father's handwriting in the union ledgers, the ones Dorian's lawyers had buried before anyone could drag his name through something he hadn't understood he was part of. She thought about 6 years of being furniture, of being invisible. She thought about what Fletcher had said. You left the meeting because she had a doctor's appointment. She picked up the annulment petition. She tore it in half, then in half again. She set the pieces on the counter between them. Dorian went very still. "I don't want out," she said. Her voice was the steadiest it had been all night. "I want the truth, all of it, from here on. I want to be a person in your life, not a variable you're managing, not something you're protecting from itself. If you can give me that, actually give me that, then I'm not going anywhere." He looked at the torn paper. He looked at her face. "It'll be dangerous," he said. "Knowing things makes you a target." "I was a target tonight because I didn't know enough." She held his gaze. "That didn't protect me. It just made me easier to use." The silence stretched. Outside the window, Miami was beginning its slow dawn. The first light catching the bay flat and silver. A pelican crossing the frame of glass with the unhurried authority of something that had no concept of last night. "No more secrets," Dorian said. He said it the way he said the things he intended to keep. "No more secrets," she said back. He reached across the island and took her hand, her wide, ordinary hand that had scrubbed tile grout and folded fitted sheets and held a USB drive like a weapon in an elevator, and held it the way he'd held her arm in the panic room, not possessive, grounding, like she was the fixed point he used to find north. She had spent 3 years wondering whether she was a person to him or a possession. She had driven to his tower tonight, expecting to confirm the worst. She was leaving instead with something she hadn't anticipated, the full truth, which was messier and more complicated and more human than the story Francesca had handed her on a drive, and which still, somehow, included him. The cage had never been the building or the marriage or the world he moved through. She understood that now, and she was choosing to stay anyway. With her eyes fully open, and her hands free, and the Miami sun coming up over the water like it was making a point.